Ajeet is a 2 or 3-time founder, and he's built two very interesting, enduring, iconic companies. Nutanix, which is a public company, $20 billion market cap. It has $2.5 billion of revenues. And then ThoughtSpot, which perhaps may be on its way to go public. And it's a very interesting company in the data analytics space. So he's a serial founder, and we are absolutely delighted to have you here, Ajeet. So Ajeet, let's start with your backstory. I think you grew up in Western UP in a family of farmers, and then you went to IIT Kanpur, and then I'm Calcutta, which are two iconic, coveted institutions in India. So you're one of those few people who have lived the quintessential, American dream as well as the Indian dream, because you came here and then you founded two, really hatched two companies, and you have plans to hatch more. So take us down the memory lane and tell us how you ended up in Silicon Valley building companies.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me here, TJ. I grew up all over UP. Actually, my dad worked for the UP state government. My grandparents, my uncles were
UP
farmers.
is the largest province in India, so it has like 240 million people.
Yes. My childhood was very interesting. My dad was a scientist. He was first from the family to come out of the village and get a job. In those days, it was all government jobs. So he would take me to his labs when I was very, very young. I learned how to do titration when I was probably in first or second grade. Some of that sort of experience of mixing things and turning it into something else was very foundational. It was really interesting. Definitely spent a lot of time in the village as well. I had the opportunity to work with my uncles and my grandparents on the farms. We were pretty blessed to be among a pretty large family. So it was a very rich childhood, I can say that. And then I ended up doing my undergrad in chemical engineering from IIT Kanpur. My plan was to come to the US and do a PhD in chemical engineering. Actually, intersection of chemical engineering and medical science. This was something where I felt that I could make a direct impact on people's life. But my dad fell sick in my last semester. So I decided to stay back in India, ended up doing an MBA, and then started in management consulting. I lasted about 1 year. I really hated it because I was only building PowerPoints and telling other people how to build a business. Or
many of us have been there.
Fix their business. While I had no experience of being inside a business. So that's when I moved to product management. I was very lucky. This was the year 2000. I was still in India. And there was a pretty iconic company at the time, i2 Technologies, because the sort of dot-com bubble bursting, they had to move all of their product development to India, which was very lucky for me because early 2000, most of the tech work in India was all services. There were not too many product companies. So I was fortunate to work there, learned a lot. Then I went and joined Honeywell, of all places. It's a very traditional company. But there was a very interesting opportunity there to work with a leader who was based in Phoenix, Arizona. He was part of the aerospace business within Honeywell. And he was very forward-thinking. He wanted to build a consumer-grade experience for aircraft maintenance. So we hired IDEO, the design firm that started at Stanford, to do the design. And we are talking about 2003, 2004, which was, again, extremely lucky to be exposed to design thinking that early in my career, which has really had a very foundational impact on how I've approached entrepreneurship. So I tell people that I learned how to build companies in Honeywell, which is kind of surprising because it's a very large organization. My boss was really good. He sort of provided an environment where you could do new things. So we built this product in Bangalore. 3 years, I built the team. And when the product was ready to launch, I moved to the US to be part of the marketing product management team here. Spent a year, and after that, I decided to move to the Valley. 2007, I came and joined Oracle as a product manager. And as soon as I came to the Valley, I was like, I can't be here and not do startups. Because before that, I was in large companies, but I enjoyed building things from scratch. And I really felt blessed to have this opportunity to be in a place where people are just willing to bet on you. Investors are willing to bet on you. people are willing to work with you in the company and so on. So I joined one of the early big data companies. It was called Aster Data, 2008. Learned so much. I think I spent 2 years there. I ran product management. But the pace of learning was 100x more than in large companies because everything was happening around me. I was interacting with the board in board meetings. I was seeing how founders were operating. We were involved in deals. I was working with Mark Ranney, who's I think some of you might have heard of him. He's a very famous sales leader, enterprise sales leader. I learned so much. For me, it was just an immense learning opportunity in how to do enterprise selling, all the way from tackling the competition, value selling, positioning, connecting your product value prop to what the customer needs, and so on. There was immense amount of learning, 2 years. And then me and Dheeraj and Mohit, we were all at Aster Data. We decided to leave and start. We said we'll just go start our own company. 2009, we started Nutanix. And between the three of us, we all had product engineering background. We felt that we can really build a product, but we had not seen how to build a scalable business. Aster Data had done very well, but we had a few very large enterprise deals. The sales motion was not as repeatable as it should be. So once we started Nutanix, my charter was to go and figure out sort of the GTM part. And for that, we picked a couple of companies at the time. Palo Alto Networks was just starting. One of the early engineers there was a friend's wife. So we connected with people that were running marketing and sales at Palo Alto Networks, even the CEO at the time. And also Data Domain was another iconic company in the storage space. Frank Slootman had just sold that company, so we connected with him. And all of this whole ecosystem of leaders, they became our advisors. Sometimes we even hired people from this ecosystem. But it was pretty eye-opening to see how these leaders had approached building companies. In fact, Frank has written a book. He's written another one now, but his original book called Tape Sucks, one of the best books for entrepreneurship, especially if you are working on B2B. I highly recommend that. So Nutanix, we started, and luckily for us, VMware was taking off as well. And we just aligned very well with the trajectory of VMware. VMware was solving a lot of problems, but in its wake, it was also creating some new problems. We identified some use cases and so on. So we built a product over a couple of years. We started selling, and the company took off. That was the time. So at Nutanix, my charter was to run marketing and product management. And I thought I want to expand my horizons and run a full company. So that's when we started ThoughtSpot. But yeah, I feel extremely blessed. I think I went through a lot here, but a few things, if I were to summarize, one is just learning from the best was a big part of this. Continuously feeling that we just need to go find who's done this best and just find them, learn from them. Second, there is a bunch of luck involved in this whole process. It can sound like a very well-scripted story in hindsight, but in reality, it's a bunch of sort of accidents that happen along the way. So that's sort of my story.
Yeah, moving from accidents to things that you've been very deliberate about in your entrepreneurial journey. You've spoken about selecting markets, and it's not a coincidence that both Nutanix and ThoughtSpot were in pretty large markets that are very deep-seated incumbents.
Yep.
So talk a little bit about why you picked those markets versus a net new market, and what were some of the design choices you had to make to win against those incumbents?
Yeah, maybe some of this came from the experience we had at Aster Data, which was a fine company. Eventually, a year after we left, it was a $300 million exit. We are talking 2009, 2010, which was a pretty meaningful exit for the time. And the observation was that if you're in the right market, even if you screw it up, you can still have some value you can create.
Market giveth, market taketh.
So yeah, So that sort of stayed with us. And Nutanix was in a massive market. I don't know, depending on now Nutanix product line has substantially expanded over time. But even outside, like 30, $40 billion market. Of course, very large incumbents with very, very deep pockets. You're talking EMC, Cisco, NetApp, VMware, everybody in that space, and many others. HP, IBM, everybody was in that space. And then ThoughtSpot, Microsoft, IBM, SAP, Tableau, Click. All of these are $1 billion+ revenue businesses just for analytics, just for BI. So the thinking was that be in a large market so that you're not dealing with market risk. Right? I look at all the risks in a startup and put them in two buckets: market risk and execution risk. And personally, I'm more excited about opportunities that are low in market risk and high in execution risk. Low in market risk because I don't want to deal with things that are sort of beyond my control. Yeah. If you are in a large existing market, you know how customers are buying something, how channels work, what's pricing. You can change all of that, but at least you know the baseline. And then execution risk being high is important because if both market risk and execution risk are low, you can oftentimes see many companies.
There was
a lot of competition, and there's no barrier to entry. And you might be able to raise money initially through the hype, but in a couple of years you find out that you can't really sustain yourself. So execution risk for me has to be high because it's fun to work on hard problems. Second, you can build a bit of a moat that allows you to build a lasting company. So that's sort of the mental model that I have worked with. Not to say that this is the only way of doing companies, because certainly the world needs companies that are perhaps very high in market risk. You don't know if there is a market, and they go create new markets. It's just not me.
And you've built products in the on-prem primitive, in the cloud SaaS primitive, and now the AI primitive. So you've been a product builder for like 20 years. Talk a little bit about some of your product principles. One thing that I noticed while I was researching both these companies is that Nutanix was launched in 2009, but the product was launched a couple of years later.
2010. September.
So you took like a good couple of years to build the product before going to market, and I think you did the same thing at ThoughtSpot, right? Which is being in stealth for like a couple of years before you take the product to the market. So talk a little bit about that mindset, that philosophy, because in some ways it is very antithetical to the conventional startup advice, which is move fast, break things, iterate fast, launch fast. How do you reconcile these two philosophies?
Yeah, I think it goes to both Nutanix. Nutanix and ThoughtSpot, we spent almost 9 to 12 months. One, deliberately picking the markets. In our case, for some people it can happen, but in our case, it wasn't that we had come across a very high value problem and we had this compelling feeling to go and solve it. So we spent time studying different markets, and then we picked the markets that we were in based on how old the technology had become, how big the markets were, what was the structure like, what was the competition, and so on. And then building the product. So the sort of general idea is that you understand the market and the problem very deeply. And then you come up with the idea on how you're going to solve it. And then you sort of approach the solution from first principles. I think it's sort of a trade-off between how deeply you have understood the problem and then how good a solution you're going to build. If you are in a market where the market risk is very high, you don't know if there is going to be a market, when crypto was happening, for example, or maybe early social networks and these sort of things. Certainly, it makes sense to build something, almost a prototype, launch it, see if there is a market, and iterate and pivot and so on. So you discover the market along the way. But if you're going after large existing market and you want to try to crack it, you have to make sure that there is fundamental innovation in the product. So there is no one answer, like I said, it really depends. But the sort of opportunities that we have gone after, it requires a bit of a deeper platform thinking in the early stage so that you build a solid platform. And then, of course, not everything we thought about has proven to be true. We have had our own fair share of failures along the way and iterations. But we never had to fundamentally change the direction of the companies.
And what is this process? Talk a little bit about this process of deciphering the market, understanding market problem, coming up with the right solution. Like, what is your process like?
Yeah, I mean, there is sort of nothing magical there. You talk to a bunch of people. These days, of course, there is a lot more information out there than in 2009. So you can read a lot. You read a lot. You talk to people. And ideally, you've had some sort of, at least one of the founders would have had some direct or indirect exposure to the space, if not the specific problem you're trying to solve. That way, you have a bit of a gut feel about how to make certain calls. But it comes down to just talking, learning your own experiences, intersecting all of that with maybe you've had some experience in a very different space that you bring to bear in new markets. And then initially also, there's a bunch of technical experiments we had to do. At Nutanix early days, we would go to Fry's Electronics, which used to be hardware. I mean, now everybody, I don't know, some of you might know Fry's Electronics. It was a hardware store. We would buy these SSDs. SSDs were new at the time. And we had 3 desktops, and we were running experiments on 3 hypervisors to make sure that our core sort of architectural thesis will actually work. We were trying to bring this whole storage controller into a virtual machine, which had never been done. It was all done in ASIC before that. And I remember I was trying to recruit a product manager, and when I told him the approach we were taking, he said, I've talked to my engineers. He opted out because he said he didn't believe it could be done, where you could actually run a storage controller in a virtual machine because there are certain performance latency requirements. So, and even at ThoughtSpot, because we built a search engine for data, it required extreme amount of performance. In fact, early days, we did a lot of experiments, and cloud was just kind of starting. There wasn't enough CPU and memory available to us to start in the cloud. That's why we had to start on-prem and then move to the cloud. But we ran, again, a bunch of experiments to ensure that we can get the kind of performance that we need if we were to provide the right sort of resources. So in both cases, there was this sort of market discovery, problem discovery, and then establishing the core architecture of the product. Of course, now with the cloud, a lot of that infrastructure is available for free on the fly. So I'm not saying people need to go do those sort of experiments today. It doesn't make sense. But whatever you're doing, you have to identify what the core risks in the product might be. And one, establish feasibility and just learn a lot, a bunch of experiments in the early days. If you feel confident about the problem you have identified. If you haven't, then the other approach of, don't worry about building a very deep solution, build a decent enough prototype, put it out there and learn and iterate. That model works as well.
Let's double click into ThoughtSpot. So as you guys cart the market, because I think Tableau was probably already a big company at that time.
Yeah.
So what was the foundational insight for ThoughtSpot? Like, what was the reason to exist for something like a ThoughtSpot?
Yeah, so some of the insight actually came from my time at Aster Data, where in the early days of big data, people were able to store and manage lots and lots of data. We are talking about 2008. This is when Hadoop was just not even a thing, actually. Cloudera was founded almost around the same time. And so people figured out how to store lots of data, but how you get value from that data, that was still a very manual process. So Tableau and Qlik is another company. It's a European company. And I remember going to an event with Qlik, and they had HP as a customer, and they were up on stage, and they said, we have installed Qlik in our company now, and if anyone wants to get a dashboard, they just need to fill up this form, and we can turn around a dashboard in a week. And they were this is something that they were sort of very proud of. So that is the state of the art. So we felt that if we can, why can't this be as easy as Google? You can go to Google, you can ask a question, you can get an instant answer. You don't have to wait for someone to respond to your search query for a week. And of course, that was easier said than done, because as soon as we started applying the sort of user experience of Google to this problem of analyzing data, we realized it's a very, very different problem. Early days, we tried a bunch of open source that was built for unstructured data, but it just wouldn't work for structured data because you need to have precision.
Yeah.
In Google, you look for TJ, and you might get 10 different answers, and you can pick the page that you like. But if I want to ask a question about how many employees are in the company or how much money am I spending on marketing, people want to have an accurate answer. I cannot give them 10 answers. So we had to take a very different approach. We had to build a new kind of search engine from scratch, which just doesn't exist. We couldn't read research papers and copy them. We just had nowhere to go. So which meant that we had to struggle a lot to make it work. But we took pride in building things that work in real world. And that has led to building a company where we have small startups to Fortune 5.
So let's say you have this foundational insight and you might have stumbled upon it by talking to customers, or it may have been a moment of epiphany. How do you validate this? Because you're going to spend the next 9 months building this product and then taking it to the market. How do you know that this is sticky enough, this is compelling enough for customers to pick you over Tableau, which was an incumbent at that time?
Yeah, I mean, you don't.
It's a leap of faith.
You don't. You just sort of, there's no math you can do which proves that before you build it, it is going to work. There is, at some point, you have to take a leap of faith. You can do all the research. You have to have the intuition. Like I said earlier, you just have to ensure your direction is right. So you're not having to rip apart everything that you have built. You have to tweak. You have to iterate. But we are talking about relatively, non-foundational micro iterations which happen along the way. But you have to, at some point, it's a leap of faith.
Yeah. Many of our founders here are probably in the journey of finding product market fit. And as all of us have learned, product market fit is a journey. It's not a destination. It's a moving target. It keeps evolving. What are your thoughts on finding, product market fit? And how do you know you have PMF now?
Yeah, like you said.
How do you measure it?
Yeah, it's not sort of a binary event that you can point to and say, now we have accomplished. Not like saying, I got 10 million ARR, so I have a product market fit, or $1 million in ARR, or even $100 million. Because, remember, even market is moving. Market is not a constant. And if you're building any meaningful company you look at, whether it's Palo Alto Networks or any of these companies, in fact, even Nutanix, only in the last 12 to 18 months, the company is reaching a stage where you can call it an extremely meaningful impact, high impact company. If you look at the stock price, it's a different story 2 years ago versus today. I think some of the things that work for us that may or may not work for everyone. In early days, when we got customers, we tried to not just source them from friends and family. We would hire an inside salesperson pretty early in the life of the company who can start making cold calls. Ensuring that your early days, you're sort of trying to minimize false positives or false negatives. Because if you go to friends, if it is they may or may not be your ICP.
Yeah.
And you don't know what your ICP is. So that's sort of the chicken and egg process. But you have to make sure there is a healthy mix of people versus people that you're pitching cold in the early days. And as you keep scaling, at least in the enterprise, it becomes a multivariable equation. The customers you're pitching to, the pain point, how you're positioning, how you're enabling your sales teams. Sometimes maybe you have a good fit, but you don't have the right positioning and right enablement for the sales team and so on. But ultimately, a lot of this gets proven when you see something called a sales productivity. It's not about a number. It's about are you able to make your sales team productive? So for sales teams, of course, the quotas are fairly well established. There are enough benchmarks. I won't repeat them. But once you get to 4 to 5, anywhere from 5 to 10 salespeople, you have to ensure that they can be reasonably productive. A good chunk of them should be hitting quota. And if they are doing that, then you know that things are working. Now, like I said, it's not just a matter of the product you have and the market, but also a big function of how you pitch and position. And that's why the founders have to be an integral part of selling themselves and working closely with the sales team to make sure they're helping them iterate with the pitch and positioning.
Yeah.
Sometimes, people that come from a product or technical background, they think that they will hire a salesperson who will just go sell. But the recipe of selling, there is a recipe of product building, but there's a recipe of selling. You have to be very integral part of and lead fundamentally the process of building the sales recipe. because it's too much to expect from a salesperson that they will tell you the recipe, because you as a founder have the intuition about the problem, intuition about the problem that you're solving for your customers and the product. So you have to be that sort of integrative thinker that helps define the sales recipe as well.
Okay, so now you have a product, you have somewhat of a PMF, some early customers. Now you want to hire a team because you got to scale this thing now.
Yeah.
So how do you hire a team in Silicon Valley? Like yesterday I met somebody, they were telling me that OpenAI, Anthropic, all these labs are tracking down graduates or yet to be graduates at Stanford and offering them like $1 million salary right out of the gate. Like how do you compete with these large behemoths and people who have deep pockets as a company founder, scrappy founder with limited resources?
It's a very small sliver of companies and talent we are talking about. You can and should find the best people. It takes a lot of work, certainly. In early days of ThoughtSpot, I remember first 18 months, I must have done more than 100 coffee meetings. And my office was in Redwood City in the early days. So I'd be driving through that start area every day, and I would try to meet people. And it took a lot of work to find the right people. It's not about just like, quote unquote, selling them. It's about finding people that have the right kind of itch. There are people working with high-flying companies, large companies, but oftentimes you'll find that they're not able to fully express themselves. They're so tied down by the system. There are people who are working on Google search. I'm talking early, this is 2012, 2013, when we were building the core team. And people that are really well paid, they're paid a couple of $1 million back in the day, 10 years ago. You can bike to work. There's a lot of restaurants to choose from. It's a good life. But these are people who want to be unshackled. They want to build things from scratch. They want to build big systems. You have to invest time. You have to be genuine. You have to understand them and invest in recruiting. If you do that, you can certainly find good people.
What are some of your favorite interview questions? What do you judge, evaluate potential hires on?
One thing I like to start with generally is just understand what drives people. And that's very important to understand because we have to make sure that what you have to offer aligns with what drives them, what motivates them. Because if it doesn't, I try to sort of, more than a question, maybe an approach where I try to argue it from their side. I want to make sure that, at least I believe honestly, that what we have to offer them is the right thing for them. Because people, they're very talented, they have families, they have responsibilities, and working at a startup, they are certainly going to make trade-offs. There are financial trade-offs, clearly. There is also time trade-offs. They're going to spend a lot more time working at a startup than they would in a large company. So I want to make sure that I'm bringing people along, but I feel sort of accountable to their families at some level, because I tell people, if you come and work at our companies, you will have a great time, you will work on hard problems, we'll have a good culture, you'll have a lot of fun. Your family will have none of that. Right? In fact, they're going to see you less. So I feel accountable to them that we make our sincere effort to ensure that they end up in a good place if they work at our company. So I try to, that's sort of been my approach. And it is all about learning about people's motivations, what drives them, how they make career choices, and where they are in life, what they want to do.
You have also built companies between US and India, like all your 3 companies have had substantial presence in India. How has that worked out for you guys? A lot of late night calls, like what are some of the benefits, pros and cons? Advice for founders here?
India or global. I mean, look, if you want to, we talked about talent, right? If you just be limited to Silicon Valley, it's of course, very good talent. And in some areas, the kind of experience you can find here can be difficult to find globally. But if you are building a lasting company, you have to look at talent globally, whether it is India or Argentina or Eastern Europe, whatever it might be, depending on the context. We've had a lot of good luck working across US and India. We've hired some really great people here who built some very foundational systems in companies like Google and Oracle and Amazon and so on. And we've had very good luck in India. The talent in India has also evolved. When we started Nutanix 2009, there were not any B2B companies, and there were not too many systems people. Similarly, early days of ThoughtSpot as well. But now Nutanix has, I think, more than 1,000 people there. ThoughtSpot's about 80% of our overall product org is in India.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Stunning.
The thing that we did was we treated them as first-class citizens. Oftentimes you'll see this approach that I'm doing all the primary work wherever the company might be headquartered, many cases in the valley, and then you send some sort of a second-tier work, QA or some bug fixes and so on. But we treated every location as a first-class citizen. We have a product design and engineering, full pods in India, so that you can take a big chunk of the product and give them autonomy within that. And that allows you to attract and retain higher quality talent.
All right, for sure. And your company is also known for having really good culture. ThoughtSpot in particular, I have had the privilege of interacting with a bunch of people at ThoughtSpot. Everybody raves about the culture. And you've spoken about this idea of selfless excellence, you call it. So expound on that idea of selfless excellence, and how did you come up with this, and how does it help you run these companies?
Yeah, I think sort of evolved. It's not that on day one we said this is what we'll call our culture. Culture ultimately comes from how leaders behave themselves. You can come up with any slogan, you can put up all the values and everything else up on the wall, but it's like day to day, people see you, how you operate, and how you make decisions, how you make choices. Culture, in my mind, is how people behave, and nobody is watching them, nobody's telling them how to act. And if I think every person has a range of behaviors. If people are in this room, they're behaving a certain way. If you go to a next room where there's loud music playing, people dancing, the same group will behave slightly differently. So we try to keep a place which is no politics, trying to make sure that people are putting the company and the team ahead of themselves, because I believe in the long run, that's the best way to be selfish.
Yeah.
You either everybody wins or everybody loses. We want to make sure that we're not creating a culture where people are jostling for the best project or the best territory or best this or that. Of course, there is room for everybody to be personally successful. That's why people are there, but they have to realize that it's a team sport. And by and large, people respond very well to that. If they see that this is a clean place to work, everybody behaves nicely. That's what we found.
Okay, I'll ask a last question. We are living in a very, very dynamic world. Like, the pace at which AI is evolving is dizzying. I think our fragile human brains will struggle to keep pace with how technology is moving. And it's also a tricky time to be building a business. Of course, there are plenty of opportunities, but it's also a tricky time to be building a business because there's one OpenAI launch and the entire category gets wiped out. So what's your advice for founders who are building AI companies when sands are shifting very, very quickly and there are no axioms? There's nothing that you can hang your hat on.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. I'm in the same boat. But
what are some of the foundation principles that have not changed?
Sure. I think, like I said earlier, there's nothing magical. I think if you understand the problem deeply, make sure that if you're building, one, you have to understand what your moat is going to be. Is it going to be technology? Is it going to be user experience? Is it going to be distribution? What is it that you are competing on? Typically price or cost sort of things don't sustain themselves well in the long run. So having clarity on how you're planning to differentiate yourself, ensuring that if you're getting too opportunistic and thinking that we can solve a problem just because there is AI, sometimes you get so driven by technology and trends that you lose touch with your customers, and you end up building things that may not meaningfully solve customers' problems. So those are some basic things you can do. The problem has to be big enough that it can't, or there is less chance of a company like OpenAI just launching a feature. Because remember, OpenAI is trying to build a platform as well, right? And it's very hard for any company to do platform and solution at the same time.
Yeah.
So yeah, they can launch some features, but is it easy for them to think about by solution, I mean application of the platform. It's very, very hard. Can it be done? In theory, yes. But if you look at the history, that has generally not been the case. So if you are building on top of OpenAI or LLMs or the new AI capabilities that have become very easily available, then you want to make sure that the problem you're solving is big enough that requires a bunch of different innovations, not just one small thing that can be easily replicated by anyone.
Okay, on that note, Ajeet, absolute honor having you here. Thanks for spending the time, and really appreciate your advice for founders and your inputs.
Thank you.